Here we go. Rolling, everybody. Shush. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Take two, please. Hello, Vogue. This is Celine Dion.
Celine Dion's son has lived most of his life behind closed doors, while his mother filled stadiums and created some of the most iconic songs ever recorded. René Charles stayed mostly in the shadows, rarely speaking, rarely giving interviews, and almost never explaining what he wanted for himself. Everyone assumed his destiny was already written. The son of Celine Dion and René Angelil would surely become a singer. At 24, that expectation has finally been broken. René Charles has now confirmed what many suspected, and his story is not what anyone thought it would be. The expectations weren't ordinary, they were impossible. Being the son of Celine Dion meant growing up with the world watching, waiting, and predicting. From the moment he was born, newspapers ran headlines about the heir to the throne of music. Fans speculated about whether he would inherit her voice. Industry insiders assumed he would walk into recording studios with doors already opened. His childhood was described less as his own and more as an extension of his mother's career. Every time he was photographed at her concerts or walking beside her at events, the assumption followed. Someday, he would step onto the stage himself. Yet, beneath those expectations was a boy who never asked for the crown. Unlike Celine, who had dreamed of singing since childhood, René Charles didn't feel that fire. He admired his mother's work, but he didn't see himself in it. He saw the price she paid, the endless rehearsals, the constant travel, the way her private life was consumed by strangers. Instead of longing for applause, he craved anonymity. The weight of legacy, rather than inspiring him, felt like a cage. It became clear early on that his life would be judged not by what he chose, but by how closely he aligned with what the world wanted. That pressure followed him through school, into his teenage years, and into adulthood. Friends became curious about his future career. Strangers spoke to him as if they already knew his path. For years, he stayed quiet, letting the assumptions build until the moment he was ready to tell the truth. His childhood wasn't normal, not even close. From the outside, it looked like privilege, private tutors, mansions in Florida, and travel around the world. But for René Charles, it meant living inside a bubble where every move was monitored. He wasn't just Celine's son, he was an extension of her image. When he was still a child, he was paraded before cameras at events, his clothes and hairstyles dissected by gossip magazines. Even simple family outings turned into headlines. Yet behind the flashbulbs, life wasn't glamorous. He had to grow up faster than most kids. By the time he was 10, he had seen his father battle cancer and understood more about mortality than most children ever do. He also saw the sacrifices his mother made daily, skipping family meals, rehearsing until her voice cracked, postponing rest because fans demanded more. At school, he couldn't blend in. His name carried too much weight. Some classmates treated him like a celebrity. Others mocked him for living off his mother's fame. Either way, he was never just another kid in the classroom. That tension made him retreat further into himself. Privacy became his refuge, and silence became his shield. While other celebrity children used Instagram to flaunt wealth or chase attention, René Charles did the opposite. He avoided interviews, skipped opportunities for public appearances, and preferred to stay behind the curtain. Celine, protective to her core, encouraged this withdrawal. She had spent her own youth being ridiculed for her looks and pressured to succeed. She didn't want the same cruelty directed at her son. So, the family built walls. They created space where he could grow without constant intrusion. Still, the curiosity never faded. The longer he stayed quiet, the more the world wondered. What was he hiding? What was he planning? For years, silence became its own story. When children of stars usually chased fame, René Charles did the opposite. He refused the microphone. He resisted the easy route of singing one of his mother's songs and letting her fan base embrace him. Instead, he stepped back, almost vanishing from public view. His decision wasn't about rebellion, but survival. He understood what fame demanded, and he wasn't ready to give himself to it. That choice sparked endless speculation. Tabloids whispered that he lacked talent. Others claimed Celine was deliberately holding him back, shielding him from failure. Fans wondered if he was struggling with identity or purpose. The truth was simpler. He needed time. While the world tried to rush him, René Charles was quietly exploring. He experimented with music, but not in the way people expected. His taste leaned toward hip-hop, not power ballads. He spent hours writing lyrics, producing beats, and carving out a voice that didn't sound like his mother's. He also developed a fascination with poker, an unlikely passion, but one that gave him the independence he craved. Cards and chips didn't care about his last name. Winning depended on skill, not lineage. This dual path, hip-hop in the studio and poker at the table, was where he finally felt like himself. Still, he kept it hidden, afraid that revealing his choices would invite ridicule or comparisons. Every step he took was shadowed by what Celine had achieved, and the contrast was daunting. But with time, he found strength in the very secrecy that once felt like a burden. When he finally spoke, he wasn't announcing failure or retreat. He was confirming what many had quietly suspected. He was never going to be his mother's copy. He was building his own story, and it was time to let the world see it. The world assumed his destiny was already sealed, but René Charles had other plans. Music was always in his blood, but he didn't want to be boxed in by expectations of becoming the next Celine Dion. Singing power ballads or touring the same way his mother didn't excite him. What fascinated him was creating something entirely different. Hip-hop became his outlet, a genre no one associated with the Dion family. He liked its rawness, its independence, its ability to tell stories without needing a choir or orchestra. Where Celine spent decades perfecting every note, René Charles wanted rhythm, flow, and authenticity. This wasn't a rejection of his mother's legacy, it was his way of stepping out of it. Yet choosing hip-hop came with risks. Fans who adored his mother's style didn't know what to make of it. Critics were skeptical, but for René Charles, it was never about pleasing them. It was about survival, about finding an identity untouched by constant comparison. While others expected polished ballads, he recorded verses late at night, experimenting with beats and lyrics that spoke to his own life. At the same time, he was drawn into another world, poker. It was a game of patience, calculation, and risk, a stark contrast to the chaos of growing up famous. Poker offered him control in a way music couldn't. Sitting at the table, his last name didn't matter. His ability to read people, to think strategically, and to take calculated risks defined him. It became a quiet obsession, one that stayed hidden for years until he finally stepped into tournaments. Both hip-hop and poker gave him something Celine's career never could: privacy. On stage, she was a goddess, a voice for millions. At the poker table or behind a mic in his bedroom, he was just himself. He wasn't rejecting music, but he was making it his own. And by choosing this path, he revealed the truth many suspected. He was never meant to be his mother's replica. His journey was about independence, not inheritance, and he wasn't afraid to prove it. Behind René Charles's silence was something deeper: Celine's protective hand. She had lived through the cruelty of public judgment. As a child, she was mocked for her appearance. As a teenager, she was criticized for her teeth, her accent, her looks. She knew the damage words could do, and she didn't want her son facing that same pain. So she built walls. Reporters were kept at a distance. Interviews were rare, often screened or declined outright. Even his social media presence was carefully managed. When tabloids tried to pry into his life, she shut the doors firmly. Celine knew the world wasn't gentle with celebrity children. they were judged twice as harshly, with expectations stacked even higher. For Renee Charles, this protection was both a blessing and a burden. It gave him freedom to explore who he was without constant public pressure, but it also fueled speculation. People wondered why Celine kept him hidden. Some assumed she was controlling. Others believed she feared he lacked the talent to match her. In truth, she was trying to give him what she never had: time. Time to grow, to experiment, to fail privately before succeeding publicly. She also carried the weight of his late father's legacy. René Angélil had been not just her manager, but also a father who believed fiercely in her voice. He might have struggled with the idea of his son stepping away from traditional music, but Celine wasn't going to let that stop René Charles from carving his own way. She encouraged him quietly, reminding him that success wasn't about fame, but about authenticity. Still, the secrecy created pressure of its own. The more they hid, the more the world speculated. And the more he avoided the spotlight, the more intense the curiosity became. For René Charles, it was a balancing act, respecting his mother's protection while longing to step out from behind it. That tension defined much of his early adulthood. He didn't want to disappoint her, but he also didn't want to live as a ghost of her career. Celine's love was fierce, her protection unshakable. Yet even she knew one day he would have to face the world on his own terms. When 2021 arrived, René Charles finally took his first step out of the shadows. He released a hip-hop EP, quietly, without fanfare or media blitz. It wasn't meant to be a global hit. It was his statement. The songs reflected his own experiences, his own voice, not a replication of his mother's. Listeners expecting soaring ballads were surprised to hear verses about identity, pressure, and carving a different path. The EP didn't dominate charts, but that wasn't the point. For René Charles, the project was about proving he had something to say, even if the world didn't yet understand it. Reviews were mixed. Some critics dismissed it as another celebrity child trying to break into music. Others saw potential in his willingness to step outside of his comfort zone. For his fans, and for those who had always been curious, it was the first real glimpse of the man behind the mystery. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was experimenting. Celine, despite being a global superstar, stayed in the background during his release. She didn't promote it heavily, nor did she criticize. She let him own the moment, a quiet show of respect for his independence. To many, the EP felt like the beginning of something bigger. He wasn't trying to compete with his mother's legacy, an impossible task, but to plant his own roots. And though it didn't make him an overnight star, it gave him credibility. He wasn't just Celine's son. He was an artist, testing his craft. More importantly, it set the stage for what came next. 2 years later, when he shocked the poker world, people finally began to understand the truth. René Charles wasn't trying to escape his family story. He was writing his own, step by step, in ways no one expected. In 2021, René Charles' first EP was more than music. It was a declaration. Released quietly, it revealed a side of him the public had only guessed at. The lyrics reflected a young man wrestling with identity, legacy, and the burden of expectation. Fans who pressed play, hoping to hear a Dion-style ballad, instead heard hip-hop beats and sharp verses. The project didn't climb the Billboard charts, but it wasn't meant to. For him, it was personal, an act of independence. Critics debated whether he had talent, but most agreed on one thing: he wasn't trying to ride his mother's coattails. If music was his way of expressing himself, poker became his way of proving himself. In 2025, the world saw just how serious he was. Entering the World Series of Poker main event, he wasn't treated as Celine Dion's son. He was treated as a competitor. Against nearly 10,000 players, he advanced to day 5, sitting with over 2.8 million chips. His performance shocked seasoned pros and earned him around $70,000. For the first time, people saw him as his own man. His late father had loved poker too, and this run felt like carrying forward that legacy in his own style. While René Charles was stepping into his own, his mother was fighting battles no stage could prepare her for. Celine's diagnosis of stiff person syndrome revealed the private struggles she had hidden for years. Her illness meant her children had to grow up fast, learning how to step in, support, and protect her when needed. For Renee Charles, the role shifted from being Celine Dion's son to being her caretaker. Watching her face pain and yet remain resilient shaped him in ways deeper than fame ever could. It gave his choices weight and made his independence even more urgent. At 24, Renee Charles finally confirmed what many had quietly suspected. He was never going to be a carbon copy of Celine Dion. For years, his silence fueled rumors. Was he hiding talent? Was he uninterested in music? Or was Celine herself holding him back? The truth was simpler and far braver. He wanted to choose for himself. When he finally spoke, he admitted his passions were not about matching his mother's career, but about creating a life built on his own terms. Music remains in his blood, but not in the traditional way. Poker, too, is no side hobby. It's a discipline, a profession, a craft he's serious about mastering. His revelations silenced the speculation and redefined him in the eyes of fans and critics alike. No longer just Celine's son, he is a man forging his own path, balancing art and competition, privacy and legacy. And in doing so, he proved something powerful. Independence is its own form of success. Celine's fans may have hoped for another soaring voice, but what they got instead is something far more real. A son determined to live his truth. Renee Charles Dion has finally spoken, and the world now knows what he's been building in silence. At 24, he has chosen a life that blends music, competition, and independence, rather than living under the shadow of his mother's voice. He doesn't need to replace Celine or chase her record-breaking career. He only needs to prove himself on his own terms. Whether it's behind a microphone or at the poker table, his message is clear. Legacy is not about imitation. It's about creating your own path, even when the world expects you to follow someone else's.